Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast, but in a different format this time because, as you can tell, I'm on YouTube.
I just Googled it.
What's the word?
A vodcast.
A vodcast. Oh, not a vodka.
No, just a vodcast.
It's a vodcast. Anyway, John and I sat down. He's fresh back from Norway, and this is the day after the big announcement. Justin Bergh is out. Dave Castro is in. What do we have to say about it? So I don't actually know what day it is. It's Wednesday. And we're back in Mallorca with this delightful, beautiful office that you've found yourself in today.
Yeah, and this is also a first.
Yes, we're on camera.
We have like a third edition.
As our boy Manu, say hello.
Hey guys.
So, where should we begin? Last time I saw you was Berlin. In your Airbnb the day after the semi-finals were finished. And we recorded the episode about Lane 8.
Lane 8 episode. Yeah, like kind of, in very tired states.
Yes, everyone was very tired and a little bit strung out, I think. So it's been a pretty end.
Yeah, there were like ups and downs, and I hadn't slept the previous night. But it's, semis is always stressful. But yeah, the lack of sleep and everything that went on kind of added to the tiredness the next morning. So,
straight after Norway?
Yeah, so Jack and I left. So, post semis, everyone's like completely free. They go do, well, actually, Morris went with Carmen and Denise to do like a range shoot.
That looked cool.
Yeah, I think, good fun and like kind of good to do those activations post event. Chris went back with Lisanne to rest. They're obviously from Germany, so they drove back home. Ella had like some kind of photo shoot in Fuerteventura and then went back home. And then Jack and I went straight to Norway.
I was watching your stories and there seemed to be a lot of saunas and golf.
It was a dream, like the weather was incredible. Like, because it's, Mallorca now is hot.
Yeah.
And so the heat's not necessarily enjoyable because it's like so intense. But in Norway as well with the light, so it's in essence like 24 hours of light. It might in essence comes back. And,
yeah, it's just making me laugh.
Yeah.
You're taking yourself on that one.
I know, I do. It's a habit of mine. There, in 6 months' time, there'll be another word that's on repeat. For now, it's in essence.
Okay. Norway's light.
I played a lot of golf, which was really nice.
Is it famous for its golf? I thought
No, but
fjords in Norway.
They had the first guy, young Norwegian guy, won PGA Tour not so long ago. So it's always good for the game, and I think there's a lot of. It seems a lot more popular golf at the moment. There's obviously this kind of Full Swing series came out on Netflix, and then also during the pandemic. Basically, no one could do anything apart from golf. And just like myself, that kind of like, I played when I was young. A lot of people similar story, played with their parents, granddad, whatever it may be. And because of COVID, they were like forced, the only thing they could do is go back in a course. So we couldn't go to a gym. You could go on a golf course though. And so a friend here, Christian, and I started playing again. And I'm got into it. So yeah, and I love saunas. So it was like the perfect 2 weeks.
Golf seems to have rehabilitated its image a bit, although not totally like the most big scandalous recently with what they've been doing with a couple of players. But
well, not just the players, the organisations with the whole kind of Live PGA Saudi-backed drama. But yeah, golf's on kind of a different level of prize money and different things.
It's funny because actually, I think that when we spoke to, I think it was last year when we spoke to Justin Bergh, he actually likened trying to professionalise CrossFit with golf.
Yes.
And that brings us neatly to the fact that we're back in Mallorca. Yesterday, the news broke that Mr. Bergh is no longer working for CrossFit. Mr. Castro is back in.
Yeah,
I'm shook.
I think shook is a good descriptive term. Like, I think no one would probably expect Dave Castro, after everything that happened, stepped back into the role. You know, like you could have put a list of say 10 names in front, and you'd be like, you know, it's a tough role to fill because of the nature of CrossFit. Although arguably the GM of sport, which was Justin's title, and in theory is Dave's new title, is a very different role to that of what Adrian Bosman's doing, which is kind of like, and at CrossFit, it's a unique role within CrossFit. Like, you know, the general manager of sports, kind of something that transitions across lots of different sports. Adrian Bosman's role, kind of programming lead. I don't know what the full term is because they are a programmer, but they're obviously a lot more to the sport, and that's like a role that Dave created. And that's where we are like kind of exploring as to what's going to happen now.
Because my understanding of Justin's role was that he was more involved in the business.
Exactly.
You know, more involved with people like Thibaut, for example, from Go Water, and that he would be the guy negotiating the deals. He was the person in charge of the media, as in like who.
Well, so he had a bit more of an overview role. So there is like head of partnerships that would directly deal with the sponsorship deals, but you know, you kind of likened it. He was like the CEO of the sport. So he would have overview of everything, from programming to partnerships to athletes to coaches. You kind of have that full overview role, and then really be in charge of the direction of the sport. So, you know, how does semis becoming part of CrossFit again is a big decision that someone like Justin would have been in charge of.
A big financial decision, I should think, as well.
Yeah,
bringing that back in-house.
Yeah, and
it costs them a lot of money.
And obviously, he still has to answer to the CEO of CrossFit, because you also have to understand the company structure, in the sense you have, you know, you now have a board, you have a CEO kind of representing the interests of the board. So there's a lot more of a formal company structure. But then within the company, you then have these kind of three divisions. You have education, affiliation, and sports. And then Justin would then answer to Don, who then answers to the board, and so forth, with this kind of typical company structure. But those big decisions are, you know, kind of he can lead that. The direction of where the sport is going is led in that position.
What do you think's happened?
Well, you know what happened. The why it happened.
Okay, yes, better question. Why has it happened?
Yeah, you know, this is all speculative information, but it probably has something to do with that somewhere people weren't happy with the direction of the sport, and therefore they wanted to change. For it to happen so drastically, you know, that always like kind of unturns more questions, because we're 6 weeks out of the biggest event that presumably Justin and his team have been building towards.
So something big's happened for it to happen now.
I think, you know,
it's a big statement.
Yeah, it's a big statement, and I think you wonder why they didn't just let this games run out. I don't know whose side that's from and why, so we don't have that information. And you know, however, it does raise this question of like, it seems a very abrupt stop considering where we are in the season. You know, we're, I don't know, less than 6 weeks out of the games. That everything is kind of planned towards, so it's a big change.
Because I mean, like Lane 8, Lane 8 gate has did take over for a while everyone's discussions, and I mean, you guys actually had a conversation. You sat down and recorded a conversation, which I thought, from my point of view, even though maybe you guys didn't agree on what you were saying, it was great that he was willing to have that conversation recorded, and that he was okay with it being released.
Yes.
I mean, he got a lot of criticism afterwards, I saw in the comments and on the channel, but so maybe he didn't realise how he was coming across, but even so, I really appreciated he was trying to be a bit more open
and transparent
about the process, whereas I'm a little bit concerned that with the return of Mr. Castro, that we're going to be going backwards.
Well, you know, the traits of Dave were never that open to feedback or or an interpretation of where the sport is going.
Man, so I don't know what he's like.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's more just that. So I think one thing that is kind of being asked for over years was transparency, direction, and you are right. It's kind of the timing of the interview was maybe not the best. I think that what we're asking for from kind of the people who participate in the sport, from coaches to athletes to agents, kind of that participatory side, is fairness across the board. And I think people resonate with that because people see that there are big discrepancies in lanes with judging, in lanes with equipment, and then you start to get into like the nuances of stuff, and this gets a bit more complex, so it's hard to relate, but the style of programming, how things are being programmed. But if we're going to take it like this big picture level, a starting block is fairness. And lane 8 was really just a representation of that fairness. The argument of the assault runners faster or slower and what should happen, it was admitted on both sides that the assault runners were a difference. And that's, I think, what really opened up this debate, because we've not really had that question before. With judging, for example, you just have one judge and it's their judgment call, and that CrossFit always defended the judge and the judgment call. They just would refuse to admit no rep. Whereas on this side, we actually got an admission as a discrepancy, and that then led into this discussion, well, there shouldn't be a discrepancy. How do we kind of develop that? And actually, from our side, it's not just a discrepancy on the runners, but actually this consistency within the sport of how we can improve and move forward with those things. One of the fears is, obviously we entered into a discussion, and now it's like, boom.
It's gone.
Gone. And so...
Yeah, there's like a lot. It feels like all of that work and that negotiation and that bridge building and relationship building, it's just got up in flames.
It feels a little bit like that. And, Castro has obviously he is the history of the sport.
I mean, people make T-shirts about this man, he is a prick and the rest of it.
Yeah.
So he's a legend.
For being a prick.
Yeah, that as well. I mean, he's engaging and charismatic and
he's
fun to be around, I'm sure, but I'm just...
And there's no question that his personality became very much associated with the sport, from the open announcements, from doing weddings on the games floor, to his like classic haircut, to his... to his kind of love for exploring. And if there was a trait with Dave, it was actually less transparency. He really didn't want the coaches to be able to help the athletes. And what I mean by that, to be specific, is that coaches were very much like shoved in the back. So when we look at the earlier days of the games, so to give you one example, 2016 athlete dinner, classic Castro. This is going to be in Carson, California. And so back there, it's like, LA, it's kind of athlete hotel, similar setup to Madison, but they have the athlete dinner before. They only invite the individuals to the athlete dinner, but still there's all 80 athletes who go to dinner. Castro typically does a speech. This is going to be the hardest games ever.
Here's your canoe.
Yeah, we meet at 4 a.m. the next morning.
Yes.
And so, there's no more information, and that's when they get on the plane, go to the ranch, do the event at the ranch, and then come back. And I think it's a cool experience, and there is something nice about that. But that lack of transparency is also apparent in other things. And if they want to take people off on a plane somewhere else, it's pretty cool. But the type of transparency we're asking for is, say, movement standards or judging consistency.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually starting to separate these two things. There's an entertainment value of the unknown and unknowable, but there's actually just a fairness of competition in sports that is important. And I think one thing that gets a bit lost is is it entertaining seeing these things? Most people don't really care, like the 11 athletes or the 40 athletes that are at the games. There's 40 athletes at the games. As a general entertainment value, people don't care too much what the 40 are. People don't care too much about the specifics of the programming. The entertainment's important. Whereas, and this is where kind of that division for the athletes, the coaches, the agents, it's not just the entertainment value, but the fairness of the sport to make sure that there's kind of standards that are held to, etc. And so I think dividing those two things is actually really important.
It's not just an example of fit survivor. you know,
Yeah.
other games.
You know, that you just happen to get lucky because of this, because of that. Well, you know, when I first started CrossFit, you know, it's like, it couldn't have been more underground. And ultimately, you know, if you made it to the games or you made it to semi-finals, there weren't like, the implications weren't as huge as they are now.
Meaning?
Sponsors, finances, these things, like the impact of not making it to the games or doing well at games has a lot more significant impact for the athletes and their teams than it did 10 years ago. And that is the kind of money influencing.
Performance bonuses, losing sponsors if you don't move on to the next stage.
Exactly, visibility, all of these things. Before it sucked, but it doesn't change much because a lot of that, basically no one was full time. So everyone was working, doing day to day.
So side hustle.
Yeah. And so, you know, everyone kind of expected that as the athletes weren't professional, the professional of the judges, it was just more accepted that there would be issues and flaws. Whereas I think now what's happened is we professionalized a lot of the sport. Like our training camp set up, not just us from the program, but everyone has got a lot more professional. Athletes have agents. No one had an agent 10 years ago. The athletes are all dedicated, making a livelihood from the sport. And I think we have to acknowledge those changes, that we're not where we were 10 years ago, and therefore we need to improve some other aspects. And this is what was kind of the whole background of the Lane 8 debate. The Lane 8 kind of framed it in a certain way. But as you say, you know, does that discussion continue? I'm speaking a lot with Brett now from the PFA.
I would like to hug Brett Kavinsky.
Yeah. And he's very passionate about improving the sports. I think there needs to be unison amongst all these different sides.
I think it must be a challenge for, like, because I'm going to say, I don't know for sure, but Castro always seem to have favourites, you know, and that doesn't make it easy for some athletes, I imagine, going into the games, knowing that they're not on fist bump levels, you know, they're not, they don't know, and also he's not going to know a lot of them, although he's not going to be like controlling the games, is he? Or is he?
Well, I don't think we've ever seen it. This is where I think the grey area starts to emerge of, like, Justin was very much behind the scenes. Like, Justin has been involved in the sport really since the early days. And it was only recently, when he had all the changes in CrossFit, that he became more of a public person. But he's been there.
2010, I think.
Yeah, it's like 13 years or so since Justin's been kind of involved with the games, which is a huge amount of time. And he's seen lots of changes go through, lots of workforce change. But he's been a consistent presence. You know, we know how Castro was in the past. And kind of what he liked to do and how he liked to be. And I think everyone would agree that was like very much the presence, personality. And so the interesting thing to follow is, will that translate now with a new title? Does the title matter? You know, does that mean there's more impact on the programming? Does that mean there's more impact on the transparency, the direction that the sport's going? And that has implications through the structure of the season. You know, it was, you know, the sport has changed so much. We used to have a open, like, regionals games. That became a structure.
Finals.
No. Then the quarterfinals, but that was, you know, a good addition maybe, or a simple addition. Then there was one point where everything was done by country. Then there was one point where it became sanctioned events. There was one point they changed the date of the Open.
That wasn't. It was through COVID, though, wasn't it?
No. They just wanted to put the Open like after the games. There's 1 year with like 2 Opens.
I thought it was the COVID year.
No. So these big changes and like a structured way forward. I'm maybe nervous for that.
We're back into rocky ground.
Yeah, it feels like there's more uncertainty now. And I think the quick change adds to that uncertainty.
I mean, what's the? I mean, presumably lots of people have been messaging you, blaming you for the ejection of Mr. Bergh.
Yeah, there is.
The lane 8 stuff, I'm assuming, has contributed to the decision.
Yeah, I know I'm nowhere near involved in the decision.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, like, that was a discussion, and there has been other things, mistakes that have been made.
I don't think that. I had a lot of support from the lane 8 argument, because I know that a lot of people feel that way. And, they relate to seeing their athletes in a similar position. And so it was just a representation of people's feelings. And to have CrossFit not admit that something, just to be like, look, guys, we fucked up, sorry.
Yeah, that would be such a nice, refreshing moment.
Yeah, because everyone understands that, it's a very tricky position for them to alter the scoring in the moment. But actually just to admit and be like, we fucked up, hands up, we're going to look at this and make this better. I think that would have been a good opportunity.
Yeah, me too, I agree. And why didn't that happen?
Yeah, because both sides had kind of already admitted that something was wrong with the runners.
Off camera, though.
No, on camera as well. There's kind of this admitted discrepancy.
Okay.
And, then their argument base is that the discrepancy was acceptable. Our argument was it wasn't. So that's kind of where the back and forth went in the discussion. And just admission, it was fucked up. Because if it was on I don't think if someone the bars were misloaded in the open or something,
yes.
And be it they light or heavy, no one's going to argue that plays an advantage. But then when you've got discrepancies in lanes through prowlers or sleds, or discrepancies in judging, or discrepancies in the runner, these things they become more grey because it's very black and white to measure a weight. But the further you move into kind of the human decision making, the less black and white it becomes. So the inter-rater reliability of judging is pretty bad. It's harder to quantify that.
The situation as it stands, I mean, yesterday it was announced that he was going. They haven't actually said that Castro is the permanent new GM, just that he's stepping in.
Yeah, which, it doesn't lead to a level of stability. We also don't know, was it from CrossFit side or was it Justin's side?
Yeah,
we don't know where this happened. Was it that they all of a sudden were like, oh no, Justin's leaving? Or was it that CrossFit let go of Justin? I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, it's ambivalent, it's ambiguous. You don't know.
Yes.
From the thing that they've released.
And I still think the one thing that we've been asking for is a clear path forward. What is the goal of? We've got a very clear path for CrossFit. They want to reach a lot more people. I can't remember 30 million people or something like that by 2030.
Yeah.
But what's the goal for the games and the sport?
All I got was we want to professionalise the sport, and I'm really I'm not sure what that means now, because that, for example, with the media passes and the media access that we were or weren't given. I mean, I had an amazing time in Berlin. It's the press guys are really helpful and helped me out a lot to do whatever I wanted to. But if I was representing another a brand or something, maybe I wouldn't have got the access that I had. But what I mean is that when I asked them, why did you do that? The answer was, we want to professionalise the sport. And then if you speak to some of the photographers, some videographers who are working in the pit, who work for other sports, that means reducing the amount of coverage so that it then can be controlled. And that in itself leads on to things how CrossFit's kind of spawned itself, it's kind of multiplied itself, which came after the media team was sacked from CrossFit HQ back in the day. And so you've got all the Buttery brothers and Talking Elite Fitness and all these people who kind of sprung up as a response to being made redundant. So how do you bring them all back inside and make how do you control them?
Well, I don't think that should be the goal.
Yeah, what I mean is like they're trying to professionalize the sport.
Yeah.
So, but they're trying to.
I think the trouble is with trying to professionalize the sport right now is that it's on some rocky foundations. So is the sport fun to watch? You know, if you would sit down there on TV and watch this as an event, you know, is that a fun event to watch? You know, I think that some of the events are and some aren't. And that entertainment value, I think, is something that has to be standardized.
A lot of it comes down to how like people like Brian Friend contribute, because I mean, without his knowledge of those athletes, it would be much more boring commentary.
Yeah, but also just the style of events. Like there's some simple things. Like a classic one again, like 2015, the finals were coverage, like live coverage on ESPN. And these broadcasting deals are huge. That's, you know, that's where the sport can truly make a lot of money, is getting a good broadcasting deal. As, you know, it's just a standard model across the big sports. An ESPN final games version, you got like pegboard, which was, again, a random movement introduced. Now it's become staple, but it was just introduced, like literally, if you speak to a lot of the games athletes from that era, 2015 was like the hardest games ever. It was the heat was so much, it was like 40 degrees, and you had Murph. So that's the full Murph year.
Is that the one where Cara?
Yeah, Cara, Annie pulled out, heat stroke. The people were just falling left, right, and centre. Like it was really tough. The volume was high, and then the final Sunday, we're in the warm-up area. Then all of a sudden they'd installed this like pegboard thing, which no one had any clue about a pegboard. Yeah, and these guys are fried.
Yeah.
You've got to do this new movement, which a few people managed to do. And then you went into like parallel deficit handstand push-ups. And that's the, you know, it's like such a risky event for the final to be broadcast on ESPN.
Because it's basically them failing.
Yeah, it was. Well, they had the crash mats, and all the athletes are just sitting on the crash mats because they can't do the movements and looking really disheartened because they can kind of see their games places completely changing because none of them can do this movement. And the year before, they had like a double grace, a throning one. And, you know, something like that, you've got like, I think they had a heat of 20 maybe. And just seeing the barbell advance, points changing.
Yeah, that's much easier to watch.
Yeah, and it's like
race.
It's a race, and it's a lot more predictable. So I think these big risks at the final of the games as being aired on ESPN, it doesn't look great necessarily for the athletes, and I don't think it's been great for the sport. And there are lots of these, you know, and I think these foundational issues also need to be asked in terms of professionalization of like, is it entertaining to watch? Like, is this a sellable product? And I think all of us within the sport agree. But if you were to hand it on to a spectator, you know, someone who's used to watching sports, would they find this interesting to watch? And you know, what kind of like package could it be? Like Strongman, for example, I think is popular because
I love watching Strongman. Yeah,
you know, these guys are like huge for one, and they just do like cool stuff, super simple to follow. You know, like I saw a clip the other day of. I've forgotten the name of the event, but they're kind of holding the two pillars.
Yes.
Hercules hold or something like that. You know, row strongman. You lift something heavier. You either do it for weight or for distance, or for time. You know, it's really easy.
And they're interesting people to look at as well.
Yeah.
I quite fascinated by them.
And so.
But then I think there are a lot of sports like cycling and Formula One, which are very popular in my house, and football as well. Football's probably of the three the most easy one to kind of watch because it's so universal. But professional cycling and Formula One, you have to know a lot about the team, you have to know a lot about the rider, you have to know a lot about the bike or the car to really appreciate the sport anyway.
Well, I disagree because there's an A to B. You know, it's very easy for someone to get into it because you can be like, who's leading and where are they in the race? And the same with Formula One.
But there's a ton of strategy involved as well.
But that's the nuance of the sport. But from a big picture level, you know, Formula One is the quickest person around.
Yeah.
But Tour de France is quickest person from A to B across various stages. And you are right, the strategy of the teams. But that depth, I think, comes later on in the sport. You know, when you like with CrossFit, for example, there's so much depth that you have to know.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'm watching an event and you have like Linda.
Yeah.
Where
is everybody?
Where is everyone? Or, you've got an event where I think the caveat to this was the marathon row was actually quite entertaining.
Really?
Yeah, because you had a screen
Oh, okay.
that showed where people were.
And you could watch people peeing on the floor.
Yeah, where you could watch, but there was a screen that told you where someone was and where someone needed to go. So it was actually quite entertaining because it was easy to follow. But the events where, someone's sitting on a rower for 20 minutes, but you have no clue what's happening, that's not as entertaining to watch.
I mean, apart from the fact assault runners are should be banned from competitions now. I actually found the first event on the Friday, that bit on the runner, just really boring. It's 2K or 3K run, but it's actually just like...
It's not unusual for it to be boring because watching someone on a static runner is not super entertaining.
But the sled ball was really fun. It was really great watching that. And those sorts of things are interesting to me, but...
Yeah, and at the games when they run, you see changes. That's really where it becomes a bit more exciting. And I think a lot of people argue this point. The one point of the season where shuttle runs would probably be more appropriate was in that event.
Yes, definitely.
And so I think that there's certain foundations of the sport, also the season. That we go from open quarterfinals, which are online events, which are probably good for people within the sport, but not necessarily great for exposure. Then you all of a sudden go semifinals, 3 weeks. It's like, boo.
Yeah.
Can you name everyone at the games?
Can I?
Yeah.
No.
No. And they're the 40 males, 40 females. I mean, could you name 20?
Yeah. I can do 20.
20, so you get like half of or a quarter of the field, depending if that's through male, female. And I think one of the reasons was because in 3 weeks you qualified 80 people. We're not even talking about teams right now, to the games in this. Whereas actually, if it's spread out over a longer period of time, I know someone, and this is where the sanctions season came in a bit, but if someone won in December and qualified for there, someone goes in, it gives them more exposure. And actually, I think gives a bit more of a storyline through the season. We had semi-finals, boom, 80 athletes. 6 weeks later, games, boom, a winner. Season done.
How do you think the worldwide ranking is going to work out now? Because that was supposed to be like taken over the year as well. So as it stands, do you think that's going to work?
So I think that having some kind of worldwide ranking is useful and can play into a structure that's like, people can accumulate points and then qualify. The trouble with the worldwide ranking is that they use that as a basis of qualifying spots. And that's where it got messy. Like worldwide ranking alone, fine. You need some way of ranking all athletes. But using that as a system for qualifying spots is where that whole thing got a bit messed up. So I don't know if they'll change that or not. I also don't know if, for example, Justin Bergh going is, are they more going underneath or not?
Underneath?
Justin, because obviously he has a huge team.
Yeah.
He's like very much the head of, he was the head of sport. So there's obviously a lot more people. Will they go? CrossFit made a lot of other layoffs. Will they stay? So it again leads to more uncertainty as to the direction.
Do you think it's a financial decision that he's gone?
I'm sure finances play. They have CrossFit don't have infinite resources. They have to think about especially as you kind of move up the rankings. There's a very clear picture of where they want to go financially. So it must play a role, but I don't know if that's a factor in the ultimate decision.
But it's going back to what we were saying earlier about the CrossFit now running their own semi-finals rather than using sanctioned events. That must have cost them quite a lot of money to organise all that, to get the teams, the CrossFit staff to Berlin, for example. I'm putting all of the competitors into one semi-final in Berlin. That must have also been a financial decision.
Yes, I'm sure. And this is the thing, part of the decision was financial, but I think a lot of those decisions were made because they wanted to bring some of the semi-finals back in-house. But what is that part of a bigger picture goal, or was that just kind of a micro goal through? Like, what's the purpose of bringing the semi-finals back in-house? And does that lead out to some kind of clearer vision for the sport and where it's going? I have a vision of what I would like to see in the sport. But, I don't know if that's possible or that would kind of play out.
What's your vision?
So I believe that something along the sanction model would be sensible. Where, I've discussed this with other people, where you have all these off-season competitions that do a great job. So you have Rogue, Dubai, Wodapalooza, Madrid. You have all these competitions. And actually, similar to what they had in the sanctioned, where, let's say the winner of this competition would qualify for the games.
Yeah.
The winner of this competition will qualify for the games. And let's say you have between 20 and 30 people qualifying for the games, or 40 or 60 male, female, through these competitions. You then go into you could have the open, quarterfinals, semi-finals, but you wouldn't need 9 semi-finals. You could maybe just host some in different parts of the world where the remaining spots would be allocated, and then you could qualify, and everyone would then qualify to the games, which is still this kind of pinnacle competition. I think what that does is it prolongs the season. It gives athletes lots of opportunities to qualify, not one weekend. It takes a lot of the costing of semi-finals away. It still allows you to keep the open, which is your kind of big flagship event for the community. So I think it's a model that really makes a lot of sense and keeps the whole season connected and entertaining, and gets to use these partners, event partners, who've been very loyal, do CrossFit. And I think you could start to instill these kind of a certain structure to those competitions. So so it keeps them all in line, that maybe number of events, style of scoring system, standard of movements across. It makes it a lot easier to follow certain event formats. For example, AMRAPs in competition are typically very hard to follow. Or the way that the lifting was done, it was kind of hard to follow who was winning. And a lot of these structures could then be implemented across this season. And I think it could create a really interesting storyline for the sport and be financially viable.
As long as you can find event partners who want to take on that risk. Because the other problem is, as competition organisers, last year, there was quite a few that really didn't make any money.
Yeah, but they're doing that risk anyway. So there's, how many CrossFit
So you're talking about using existing competition?
I don't think you need, maybe you add in 1 or 2 more, or more people want that opportunity, but there are already events out there.
Like French,
like Madrid, you could Dubai, yeah, the down under. There's already all of these events happening. They're already taking that risk. And, I've spoken to some event organisers, but obviously not all of them. But I'm sure that if an opportunity to qualify athletes to the games is also there, it could add a really beneficial factor to the competition.
Certainly the athletes will be more motivated to attend.
Athletes more motivated to attend. It ties it into CrossFit more, which, if they're CrossFit licensed or not, gives it more weight. And if they're CrossFit licensed or not, they're doing CrossFit. With Jacqueline last weekend, she competed on team competition.
Yeah, I saw Shima did it.
Yeah, and
they won it, huh?
They won it.
Great.
Yeah, it was a good event. And they don't call themselves CrossFit; they're doing CrossFit. And I think that the greater good of this kind of organisation that is CrossFit can really benefit from these events if they, these events kind of want to be part of CrossFit,
Yeah.
And so it's how is that bridge formed that's mutually beneficial for everyone?
But is that coming back to the image rights issue and coming back to them wanting to control the content that's being put out? Because that is still to me, that's and I don't want to sound super snooty about it, but that always seems to me like an American problem. Which is that they want to have the brand rights. They need to have so much control over the copyright. So to share or to include other people becomes a problem.
Yeah, but I think if they do things well, for example, the broadcasting for each of those competitions, if the sport's going to be a success, it's because people want to watch it. And being then able to broadcast, CrossFit could then still be in control of the broadcasting and their specific media that goes out. I think it's very important that the brand controls the brand and the image and the story that they want to tell. I think that can still be done in a good way, and I don't think it would have a negative impact on the content creators, the media that's kind of produced. Like, you look at lots of other sports, you've also got the PGA and what's happening there, but then a lot of people go to other resources to find out information, to read news resources. So I don't think it's going to, if anything, I think that CrossFit becoming, the sports growing will benefit the central organization of CrossFit. And I think that there is a structure of which that can be done. And I don't necessarily think the steps are currently in that flow or direction.
What's going to happen then? How are we going to get what we want?
So,
how are you going to get what you want? You stay for the ride.
I think that joining kind of forces, like someone's vision may be different to mine of where the sport should be. However, one thing we all have unison on is that there should be fairness and consistency in the sport. So I think that's a great starting point to build that connection. And that was one of the big parts of speaking so much with Brent and the PFAA, starting to form that foundation. Obviously, Brent has very good connections with the athletes on that side. We have a connection with the coaches. We also want to involve the agents who are now important in that space and be like, okay, how do we form this kind of voice of the athlete and make sure the voice of the athlete is heard?
Like a union.
And it's basically that the athletes have fair conditions to compete under. And then hopefully that gets heard. And then the next stage becomes trying to find some, possibly some standardization of programming, in the sense we know the movement standards or what's going to be done.
Yeah.
Like, what is a bar-facing burpee? Right now, CrossFit has used so many variations. How do you do a handstand push-up? Well, CrossFit's used so many variations. It depends on and it really shouldn't, because, it just, those kind of things create more confusion than benefit. Really, does it change the test, changing the way you measure the handstand push-up? No, but it creates confusion. People measure wrong, and then there are mistakes, and it's very hard to organise and follow.
So, I guess, depending on how open Mr. Castro is to these discussions, is really going to be whether you're going to be able to push that forward, or you're going to be stuck in a cul-de-sac of frustration.
Yeah, we're back into time will tell. So, is this a step forward or a step back? No idea. And when I say step forward, for both the sport and where things are going, I think people were surprised, like you said, shocked or shocked, because Castro would be kind of removed.
I honestly thought, hang on, is it April the 1st yesterday?
Yeah.
And I looked at, it was Morning Chalk Up I was looking at, and I looked to check it wasn't Make WODs Great Again or a meme or something. It's this is not happening.
Yeah, very unusual. And I think Dave, the community love Dave. They love that uncertainty. They love that entertainment value.
Yeah, they do.
And I think that entertainment value is very important, but it shouldn't be at the sacrifice. So there's the qualities there and the negative parts. And I think we need to be able to separate those two things, because at some point, the entertainment value, if it becomes destructive to the athletes, isn't great for the sport. But you can, if everything's standardized and you still want to surprise them, sending them on a plane or choosing those things, I still think that can be done.
Yeah.
But then actually when they arrive to the competition venue, it's safe. They have, they have some kind of consistency across the legs. And when you go out to the ranch or something, then it gets very hard in terms of making sure distances are the same between GHD, their floorings level, and all these things matter in the consistency, but they may not matter in the entertainment value. And so I think actually differentiating those two things might be useful for the discussions as well.
Like some kind of monitor going on outside of that to like monitor the fairness of it. Almost
and that's,
like
yes.
an independent judging body.
Well, I think that what we will hopefully see is something like that come to fruition. I think that's what we would like to try and push for, is to have some form of body that's not within HQ that can start to be involved in those decision-making processes to make it fair for the people involved.
And meanwhile, we're training for the games.
Yeah.
Ella's going. Moritz is going.
Yeah, we also have Veronica, a team
Veronica is
Yeah.
going, of course. So now, apart from all of this uncertainty, you now have to train for the unknowable anyway.
To put it out there, CrossFit has always been uncertain. So this is not unusual.
I know you're very like next about it, but for me it's still.
Well, I think the change now is since Lane 8. I've always been very. I've always shared my thoughts, but in very like non-public settings. Whereas now I've become a lot more open to sharing and discussing these thoughts and ideas in a public forum, and that's the difference. And our training for the games, we've always known that the games, they could completely change their programming. They could cut down to 5 athletes.
Yeah.
They could do whatever they want to do.
But it is like that. You have to hustle a lot, don't you, in CrossFit? I mean, everybody except maybe like big shoe companies is really like grinding to get the success that they deserve.
Yeah, I think that this comes from that everyone sees the potential of CrossFit. And I think probably from 2007 to 2017, like the growth was phenomenal. And then we've entered into this weird place where it seems to have plateaued and the potential is not being reached. And a lot of people like put the analogy to like UFC, which I don't think is fair because it has a very different concept.
UFC, really?
Where it's done phenomenally well.
It hasn't plateaued, has it?
That's the point.
Oh, okay.
Is that CrossFit kind of... I think everyone within the sport really sees this potential, wants to see it grow, but it hasn't grown. And that has reflections on, if we were to open an athlete-only gym, and it's going slightly off topic, there's no return on that investment.
No.
There's just not the money in the sport to justify these costs. Whereas, if the athletes were all of a sudden going to compete for $1 million or, then you start to go, actually, the infrastructure behind that gets a lot stronger. You can then start to do these athlete-only gyms or these things. But as it stands at the moment, only a handful of athletes can reach that kind of millionaire status from the sport. Whereas, we always joke now because we spoke about the start being into golf.
Yeah.
The amount these guys win is phenomenal. I mean, just making it through the cut into the final days, like you're guaranteed like at least €50,000, which is, basically third place at the games. That's like 60th in one weekend. And they have these tournaments every single weekend. Like some of the prize money in like the FedEx Cup goes up to like 17 million for first place.
So where is that money coming from?
Broadcasting rights, sponsors, the people that are interested to go to watch this, and that's because it's entertaining to watch. And this is where that foundation comes in. We're talking about consistency in the sport right now, but there's other discussions about how to make it entertaining and the type of events you should have in order to do that.
So how to make it profitable.
Yeah, which I think comes, and hopefully that should fall in line from a good structure. Like the sport should be profitable. Everyone loves CrossFit. We all do it. We all love watching it. How can we take that to a broader audience? Those are the discussions that I think should be kind of put on the table and start to had.
Well, let's stop there for that. I just want to ask you, because I don't know when I'm going to see you next. How are Ella and Moritz and Veronica preparing? Are you going to do some kind of games camp?
So
it isn't long until you go to America.
No, it's like 4 weeks, so we still got a bit of time. But Ella's here grinding away. Moritz arrives in like 10 days, and he'll stay here. We'll travel together to the States. Then Veronica comes over for a week camp, and then travels a little bit later. So she starts the games almost 4 or 5 days earlier than the...
Wow, that's a lot earlier.
Yeah, just because I think they're going to finish all divisions by Thursday, and then the individuals start Thursday. So she's got like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday or something like that, and then the other guys start on Thursday.
I guess to empty stadiums then.
Unfortunately, this is a whole nother discussion, but yes, probably
I feel sorry for the masters and the teams.
It's really...
They don't get any attention.
I do wonder if at least they can take them into the Coliseum, because when they have the individuals and everyone else together, they don't really go in the Coliseum, and it's even worse being in this kind of like cowshed bit with no spectators.
Yeah, I've actually done an interview recently with Antonio Alves.
Yeah,
who's very cross about the situation with masters and prize money.
Yeah,
and I'm going to try to get some balanced response from some of the organisers of the competitions before I release that episode.
But in defence of the organisers, like, there's not really that much money for individuals, let alone for masters. And I think that until you can kind of demonstrate that, so I think with the elite individual athletes, you can now say that these guys bring spectators in, they get views, they really are upping the level. We need to find a way that can translate, say, through to the masters, so the same thing can happen, because right now that's not necessarily happening. And we put on events, so we to not only put on the event, but then to pay the athletes is very hard. And I think that it's understandable that there's no money for masters athletes. It was only last year 20 to 40 of the games made money.
Yeah.
So it's only last year that happened. So you used to go to the games, and if you didn't finish in the top half of the games, you wouldn't get any prize money, which
stings when you're supposed to be like top in the world.
Yeah, and so we are seeing progress in that, but it's probably going to take if nothing changes, it won't trickle down to masters. But if the improvements start happening, then eventually I think that will start to translate into masters.
Let's hope so.
Yeah,
because all the elites do tend to become masters. Maybe that's when it will change.
Yeah, I think it can help for the
older.
I think it can help for like the viewership. Seeing like Sam Dance, Froning was obviously involved. Scott Paget in Briggs.
Come on, don't leave out the girls.
Yeah, there's China Cho. There's a lot of girls now who are guys in the Masters who will bring that to it. And that was one of the thoughts we had on allow super teams, because then actually we'll probably get more eyeballs on teams, because you have a Dan Bailey.
The teams, that's another thing though. Like when I was watching at Berlin, I don't really get the chance to watch many teams competitions, because when I'm at competitions I'm often shooting or working somewhere, and I was watching the teams, and there's the connections, incredible support they had for each other. It was just like, it was really beautiful to watch compared to the out and out like brutality of being an individual.
Yeah.
Compared to the teams, I was really moved by some of them. It's like, I think there's so much more time could be given to them as well.
Yeah, and we can, there's so many like levels to this. But what I think is hard is that trying to realise all this potential at once. Trying to realise a team competition when things aren't necessarily right with the individual competition, trying to realise that through various age groups that go all the way, trying to realise that through... So what this problem that we're talking about happens at the top of the sport, if we kind of talk about like athletic performance, and then obviously that probably gets even worse as you get further down, because less time and attention is paid onto it. And so I think if we can set the standard super high at the top, that will bring the rest of the sport forward, and that's what needs to be focused at that point first, and then the rest will follow. Fingers crossed.
Over and out.